Good evening to you. This is the WCBN. We're here at the second summer reading program of the year, and they're doing a talk on bees today. And that's a very important subject because without bees, there would be no food, is what I'm told. So I don't know. It has all kind of, they found it back in the Pharaoh's tombs, and they actually used it. So this is going to be an interesting thing and something all these children need to learn about. We're WCBN Channel 12. We're sponsored by East Hard Road, Tennessee Ridge, Signature Healthcare Revere, Houston County Drug Alliance, and Traditions First Bank. Like I said, this is going to be a discussion on bees and beekeeping.
Everyone to our summer reading program, and we're all going to have to be quiet so everyone can hear, okay? First off, I would like to thank Traditions Bank for sponsoring our program this year, and also to all of our other sponsors. They're all listed out front if anyone wants to see. We'd also like to welcome our guest speakers today, Miss Jane and Mitch Latch. Thank you guys for coming. They're here to talk about bees today. And before we get any further into that, I'm going to let them take over.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry. Good afternoon.
That too.
That was a trick question. We're going to talk about honeybees today. And one of the first things I need to have you help me understand is how many different types of bees are there in North America? And I was wondering, does any of you know that? How many different types of bees there are in North America? You know? That's true. The hornet is one. There's 350 different types of bees, and honeybees are only one type. Honeybees were actually brought to North America when it was settled by the Europeans. They're not indigenous to this part of the world, so it's kind of an invasive species. Just a bit of trivia. Honeybees produce, amongst other things, what? Honey, yeah. What's so good about honey? This is my nose. That is sweet, isn't it? It's sweet. And for a long time, honey's been sweet. Kings used to have honey for sweetener in their meals, and the common folks pretty much didn't. Today, we all can. We all can have honey in our meals. Well, besides making honey, what do you think honeybees do? Do you know? Do you know? They clean out their hive? Well, yeah, that's true. What do they do for mankind? Yes, sir.
They follow their queen.
Well, that's true. They very much follow their queen. But what they do for mankind is they pollinate crops. You know what that means? The seeds that we eat or that we feed to other animals are made by plants that have been pollinated, and bees will sometimes pollinate plants. Soybeans is one crop that honeybees can pollinate that it about doubles their production, or not quite doubles, but 50 to 60% more production just if you have honeybees pollinated. And when they pollinate them, what they do is they get pollen on their legs and so forth, and when they go from flower to flower to flower, that pollen transfers from one flower to another, and that's what actually makes the seeds grow. That's what pollination is. What are you looking at me for? One of the other things they make in the hive is wax, and we've got a chunk of wax here. We'll send around. Everybody can take a smell of it, and it's basically like paraffin wax. It'll burn in a candle, but they make a little bit of it in every single hive, and that's actually what they put. They make a honeycomb with it, and that's actually what they use to hold the honey, to hold their brood, their young, as they're developing, and that sort of thing. And we'll show you a little bit more about that as we go through some of this information. They make other things, and it's not so popular as honey and wax, so I'm not going to get into it so much today because it's not the best tasting stuff in the world, but it has a purpose. What do honeybees eat? Does anybody know what honeybees eat? Yeah.
Honey.
They eat honey, that's right. What else do they eat, you know? I used the word a little bit ago. They also eat pollen. Pollen. One healthy beehive full of bees will eat 80 pounds of pollen in a year. You know how much pollen that is? That's a ton. I mean, 80 pounds of pollen is a lot of pollen. And so I like to think that my bees help me from having so many allergies, but I don't know if that's true or not. What else do they have eat besides pollen and honey? Yeah. Flowers? I don't, do they eat flowers? Well, in the form of propolis maybe, but water. I gave some water to these bees earlier. There's my water bucket, and there's some bees in this observation hive. We'll get a look at those later. There's a queen bee in here, and I imagine there's a few of you that'd like to see a queen bee. But I have to keep them watered just like any animal. So, and they are just a very small animal. A lot of people here may have family that has cattle or horses, so they have 20 head of cattle. I have flying livestock, and I have hundreds of thousands of head of flying livestock. That's these bees. They all fly, and for various purposes. Almost always, there's one queen in a hive, one queen, and there'll be 1,000 or so drones, which are the boys, the males, the boys. And then all the rest of them are females that are not fertile. They're not a queen, but they're female, and they're the workers. Almost all the bees in the hive are female worker bees. And they're the ones that can sting. Oh, we're getting to the bad word there, sting. You ever been stung? It hurts, doesn't it? All right? A lot of the bees that we're talking about, the 350 different varieties, they sting. But there's one big difference between honeybee stings and other bee stings, in that the stinger itself, actually, the bee loses it. When it gets in your skin, it's barbed. So the bee loses it, and when the bee goes away, it leaves part of its body behind. And it stays stinging you for about a minute if you don't get it off your skin or out of your skin. A wasp or a hornet, they can sting you and sting you and sting you, and they don't have a barb on their stinger, so they can sting you 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And I've been stung by the same wasp 7 times at one time. And that was a very good learning experience. But nonetheless, it hurts. So I try not to get stung. And when I'm working with the bees, there's ways of keeping from getting stung. And what do you think that might be? How do I keep from being stung? Yes, exactly. That's one way. I actually use bare hands, but a lot of beekeepers will use a heavy jacket and a veil, and I'll put the veil on for you to show you how crazy it makes you look. But it keeps the bees. Okay, she'll send the hat around, but it keeps the bees out of my face and my eyes especially, because if you get stung in the eye, it's not a good thing. So I would put a bee protective clothing on. Also, there's something called a smoker sitting around here somewhere, and we would put leaves or grass or shavings in it and start a small fire in it, and it would smoke. And you can use this to smoke bees. And you would smoke at the entrance, and then when you went in, you'd smoke some more. And what this does is kind of like a sedative for the bees, and it calms them down a lot. They do 2 things. One, it just affects them directly, and it calms them down. And 2, they start to eat honey. And when they start to eat honey, they start to fill up. And when they start to fill up, they get even lazier, so to speak. They get less active. And so when they're getting less active, they're less likely to sting you. Another thing I do, and everyone should, is I try to keep from smelling. Like perspiration, like certain perfumes and colognes. And so there's several things that we do to keep them from stinging. Yeah, yeah. This is a hat that can be used in conjunction with one of these veils to keep the bees away from your face. I don't use a heavy jacket. I just use a shirt, and I use bare hands. I've gone from using gloves, and a lot of beekeepers use gloves, but as you get more and more used to it, and you're going to get stung anyway, even through the gloves, so They used to get caught in the folds of the gloves, because the gloves would come all the way up here, and they'd sting me every time. So I said, if I'm going to get stung, I might as well get stung down here. What? Oh. And why do they sting? Why do they sting? This is really, really important. To stay protected, that's a good point. Yeah, that's one reason they'll sting. The main thing is they'll sting when they feel threatened. Not always. If you're close to them when you're in their home, they'll sting you. They will want you to get out of there, so they'll sting you. But if you go up to a bee at a flower and be very gentle and don't pinch her, you can carry her around. She won't sting you. I've done it many, many times. But don't do it unless you want to get stung, because if you squeeze them at all, she will sting you. Okay? But they do it to protect themselves, and the reason they would do it is to stop you from doing something they don't want you to do. And they're not running around thinking, oh, I want to sting this person. They react to their sense of smell and to being pinched and to someone invading their home. All right, let's I talked for a minute. You got a question? What? You saw a wasp? Ghost it? Go ahead. You saw a bee? Okay. Are there any questions? I've covered quite a bit of material, and we're going to get to a little bit more here in a bit. Are you sure? Yeah. So, boom. You're right in your sleep. You'll see them sometimes, won't you? Sorry? Yes, ma'am?
What happens with the bee after he loses his stinger?
All right, very good question. Good question. The question is, what happens to the bee after they lose their stinger? And the answer is they die. So in the case of a honeybee, if that bee stings you, it's basically a dead bee walking until it can't hurt you again, it can't sting you again. So it will, sometimes it'll fly off and sometimes it'll just walk off, but it's a dead bee. Not the same thing is true with hornets or wasps or bumblebees and that sort of thing. If they sting you, they still have their stinger, they're still whole. So they can come back and sting you again and again. And that is another important distinction. Other questions about honeybees or stings or honeybee food? No. I'm going to start asking questions if you don't. In a minute. What this is, with man liking the products of the bees that like honey, for instance, we try and manage them so that we can take advantage of them, so to speak. So we actually provide them a home that we are then able to take apart and take some of their surplus away. We don't take everything they make. If you did, they would starve to death in the wintertime. So as a beekeeper, what we'll do is at the end of the summer, we'll make sure that they have enough food to last the winter. Usually that would mean 2 of these boxes stacked on top of each other full of pollen, full of honey, and full of bees and brood. What these are, I've got this one tilted up here so you can see. We put frames in there with foundation, and they will take this and draw it up and draw a comb out and fill it with honey, fill it with brood, fill it with pollen. Pardon? Babies is a technical term for brood. Let's go through that cycle. When an egg is laid in the bottom of one of these cells, it stays in that cell for 21 days. The egg forms a larva forms a pupa, and after 21 days, a worker bee will emerge. That worker bee that will then work inside that hive for 21 days, roughly, 3 weeks. They clean cells, they feed other bees, they feed larvae before the cells are capped, and basically do housekeeping chores. And as the 21 days progresses, they work their way closer and closer to the door, which is now back here. And then they'll start to fly. They'll serve as guards for a while, and then they'll start to fly out and start looking for food. I'm going to send around, this is a picture on a frame, so it's similar to what you might see in there in real life, but you can see where there are eggs in the bottoms of the cells, little white specks. They're very, very small, very hard to see. And then you can also see in the bottoms of some of these cells before they're capped, in these pictures, the larvae as they get a little larger. So pass that around. I've got another one I think I'll end up passing around that gives you an idea of what it looks like. That's got magnified areas on it, so you can see it a little easier. Some of us with older eyes have to wear magnifying glasses in order to be able to see them in real life. So in a way you might think of this as a modular home for the bees. So we can move this stuff around and we can take out the honey that they have that's extra for that year, and we can go take it out and put it in a jar and enjoy it. Another thing, there's a couple other things that bees make that we use, and some people like to take pollen pollen, period. Supplements is the word I was looking for. In the pill form, they're really sweet. It's really interesting material, but it has a lot of protein in it. It has really good food value, and so a lot of people take it as a supplement, sort of like a vitamin. There are other things that I don't like myself, so I don't like to talk about it a whole lot, but something called propolis, and I've basically tasted propolis out of the hive, and you can have it. It supposedly has some good properties, like microbial properties and that sort of thing, but I couldn't take the taste, so I forgot about it. One of the things I did not mention, is, has anybody ever heard the term a swarm of bees? I know. You've heard the term swarm of bees? Well, in the case of honeybees, one of their natural reproductive tendencies is when the colony that's in this, say there's a colony that's living in this hive, and it gets too big for the hive, about half of the bees and the queen decide to split, and literally split the hive into two. So they grow a new queen, and the old queen leaves with the swarm, which will amount to about half the bees in that hive. So half the bees will go out and fly out on a tree limb with the queen. While they're out there, these bees go back to work. They got a new queen, and she starts doing what she does as the new queen. The old queen will then, the bees with the old queen will go out and try and find a new place to live. And it might take a few hours, or it might take a few days. And so if you see a swarm of bees on a tree limb that looks like a football or an odd-shaped bladder, and it's really dark colored, very dark gray, like that podium there, brown I mean, and it might look like the shape of a football, or it might look like some other shape that looks like a bag. It could very well be a honeybee swarm that's getting ready to go find a new place to live. Once in a great while, they'll actually start a hive right there in the tree, hanging off the limbs. They'll start with the comb coming down. That's not very frequent, though. But that's a natural mechanism for them to split and become two colonies instead of one. All right. Oh, where's the? I'm going to just get it. Okay. One of the things you'll also notice, this foundation mimics nature. If you'll look at each one of those impressions on the foundation, what shape does it form? 6 sides is a hexagon. Okay? Think about a hexagon and go back to your engineering courses in graduate school, and you'll realize that it's a very efficient structure. And it's so efficient that 1 pound of beeswax can form all the honeycomb in a hive. 1 pound of beeswax can form all the honeycomb in a big tall hive. 1 pound of beeswax can hold several hundred pounds of honey, brood, pollen, and that sort of thing. Very efficient. Very thin, very small amount can hold a lot of weight. And it's partly because it's very efficient structure, if you will. Okay. You remember that from your engineering course? Me neither. But it's a fact. All right. I got that on my list. How long, I already mentioned some of this. How long do bees live? Now, the worker bees I mentioned earlier, their egg is laid, they stay in the cell 21 days, they emerge and they work inside the hive for 21 days, and then they fly. How long do they live after they begin to fly looking for honey and for pollen? Coincidentally, during the summertime, coincidentally, about 21 days. Now, when I was your age, I was told it's because they work themselves to death. And in a manner of speaking, that's true. But the real reason they quit flying is because they wear their wings out. They fly so much, and they touch flowers and parts of twigs and so forth, and other bees even, with those wings. And over time, those wings get shorter and shorter and shorter, and there comes a point in time when they can't fly anymore. So when they go out to get that last load, they walk. Of course, they never come back because they don't have enough food in their system to take care of them for very long, as a general rule. So the worker bees live 21, 21, 21. The drones, they'll live as long as the rest of the hive will let them. They're similar when they come out of the hive, or out of the cell. They're 21 days old roughly. They're not quite that old, but when they come out, they only have one purpose in life, and they can live all summer. But come September, if they hadn't made good on that purpose in their life, the worker bees say, "We're not feeding you all winter. You're out of here," and they kick them out. So in September, the drones die if they hadn't done their job. And of course, their only job in nature is for them to mate with the queen. And then the queen herself can live up to 5 years. One queen can live up to 5 years. The problem is when the queen becomes produce less and less eggs, the colony size gets smaller and smaller. So sometimes along the way they'll decide, let's get rid of this queen, let's supersede her, let's get a new queen. She's not doing a very good job, and we're going to suffer if we don't. And so they'll get rid of the old queen and raise a new queen, and she will then. So in other words, a lot of times they only last a couple of years before the bees themselves get rid of her. Once in a while, there's two queens in the hive, but not very often. It's coincidence, they think. All right. Any questions before we go any further? Come on. I want to ask you a question. Yeah. You're going to see the bees here in a minute. I got a few here. I got a few. All right. I already talked about how we can handle them using the smoker and some of the tools and so forth, and be gentle with them. If you go up to a hive and do that, you're asking for trouble. They're gonna get mad. I'm sorry, upset. They'll get upset, and you'll get hurt. There are a lot of problems that we have nowadays with bees. We have problems. They have problems. Not only were honeybees brought into this part of the world several hundred years ago, but more recently we brought the pests with them. So we've got such things as small hive beetle, we've got varroa mites, we've got tracheal mites, we've got all sorts of viruses and bacteria that we brought into this part of the world from somewhere else. And so that's what the beekeeper, one of the big jobs of the beekeeper is to try and keep that stuff in check so that it doesn't kill all your hives. And in the last few years, you've probably heard of something called colony collapse disorder. And they're looking into why the colonies are just dying. And they think it might be partly because of pesticides, and it might be because of some of these other pests. And I think it's probably a combination of all of that. So they have a lot of problems, and the beekeeper will sometimes treat for those problems or try and outsmart them in other ways. I don't treat, I don't use any chemicals, but that's my management philosophy of managing bees. So what I do is I have more beehives than I really want, but in the belief that if I lose half of them, I still have as many as I want to get honey from. One of the interesting things about honeybees too is where they are on the food chain. If you have pollution, if you have some of these pesticide issues that arise, they're some of the first insects that can give us a heads up, hey, there's an issue here. I'm dying because you're killing us and you don't know it, with pesticides, for instance, or with some other environmental factors. Speaking of environmental factors, the military and others, the military has trained bees to locate landmines where they can't find them, they've lost them, so to speak. They'll actually train bees to go find the landmines for them. You had a question?
How many the queen bee have like when they have like how many eggs does the queen bee like have?
Okay, how many eggs?
Yeah.
Well, in the summertime, a queen bee can lay 1,500 eggs a day. And she can live, now in the wintertime she doesn't lay hardly any, but in the summertime she can lay 1,500 eggs a day, and she can do that for a couple of years. So she has the capability of producing a lot of eggs. Pardon me? Wood bees? I don't know much about wood bees, except they bore holes in wood and make a mess out of some of the stuff that I build.
My friend at her house, she had like holes from the
I've got a few of those myself. Other questions? Yes.
You're talking about some of the problems that were brought up with the bees. Is that the reason why people pasteurize?
No. I don't know why anyone would pasteurize honey. Honey is a preservative in and of itself, unless you add water, in which case then yeast can grow. The honey that we have in the hive, when it's capped, has such a low moisture content, it will not produce, it will not support any form of growth, so yeast cannot turn it into anything. So that's one of the wonders about honey. They actually use it now for medical treatments on burns and other wounds, that so when they take the dressings off, they don't pull skin and so forth off. And it's sterile. It's not sterile. It just won't support life. And so it's kind of like a antibiotic of sorts in and of itself. The pasteurization and all of the honey that we have, I couldn't do it. I don't think I could do it. But pasteurization ruins a lot of the good things I think that are in it. That's my opinion. I'm no doctor. But if you've got pollen in there and you cook it, it's just cooked pollen. It doesn't have a tendency. If you use it to desensitize your system to allergies, and some people do, it won't do it anymore because it's cooked pollen. It's not raw pollen. And some of the enzymes, they would get cooked. And the enzymes that are in there do certain things for your system, like probiotics. So, that answer your question? Yes. How can they sting us? Well, they have this little stinger on their back side, on the back end of their body, right back here. They go, it doesn't stick out all the time, but it sticks out when it gets mad or upset. I won't say mad, upset. If you rattle on their hide, or you go in there and you start moving their home around, they really get upset, and they will come and they'll land on you and they will stick that stinger in. It's real sharp, like a needle. They'll stick right in your skin. And that's when you say, ouch. Okay. Did that answer your question? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I can get what to see that.
You didn't get to see this?
No.
You want to see it?
Mitch, we can wait.
I want to show you the bees here in a second. Yes. Absolutely, it makes you swell up, doesn't it? Some people are worse than others. I'm actually allergic to honeybee venom. I swell up quite a bit, so instead of going to the hospital, I just make sure that it doesn't go too far and get too far up my system. But yes, it's a venom. They call it a venom. It's a poison. All right, what we got here, we've got a whole bunch. This is basically a slice out of a hive. If this hive had bees in it, I would have taken a frame out of the top super and put it up there, and a frame out of the bottom and put it down here. So if we can find her, there's a queen in this hive. It's an observation hive, and it's a full hive because it has a queen. I hadn't found a drone, so we don't have to worry about that, but there are a whole lot of workers. And we'll look for the queen, but if you all want to, you can come up here.
Wait, no.
Not yet?
No, let
Hold on.
First, we're going to do door prizes. And once we do door prizes, after we're done with that, you guys can come up and see the bees and make a line and go get snacks. But before then, we're going to do door prizes. This week's door prizes are for the ones who brought their book log in and showed that they read 10 books this past week. If you haven't done that this week, you have another chance next week to read 20. Okay? You got to make sure you bring your book log in to show that you did that. Make sure your mommies and daddies remember. Okay? And I'm going to get Miss Jane to come in and help me pull our first winner. And our first one is, check your tickets, it is 351831.
No.
You got one? And the number one door prize right now is a little bee mask.
That's a little bee man.
Did she get one? Yes, she's got it. Okay, let me see your ticket.
My mom has my.
And that's it, so that's what you get.
I don't have a ticket, I don't.
All right, we're going for another one. And this one is 351829. 351829. Did you get that one? Let me see. That is, and you get a pretty blue bag. You get to keep that one. Go ahead. Okay. All right, we're going to do another one. This next one is 351827. Did you get that one? Let's see. There you go. That's what you get. All right, the next one we're going to do some lanyards. And this one is 351832. Let's see.
Stick it in there so.
There you go. Would Mitch like to draw one? Yeah, there's only a few you can read this time. Let's see, this one is 351818. All right, and the next one. So we draw another one.
That's why I'm gonna be.
I think you get one of the bees to draw.
This one is 351816. And that's it. There you go. Three, 813. That one's yours. All right, we're going to do 3 more.
Big. Come up here and take it. I don't let that.
351835. You got one?
You take a picture, you're the closest thing we can just do it.
You get a dinosaur pencil. This one is 351826. And let's see. There you go. Okay, and very last one, and after this one, everyone gets the coloring sheet. It's 351821. All right, now that all of the children want to come up and get in a line and be quiet because we don't want to scare the bees. Right in front, you're going to be able to see the bees and also get a coloring sheet. Once you are done looking at the bees, please go over and see if you want a snack and take you a chair over and sit down at the table and you can eat.
All right, I'd like to ask you all not to tap on the plexiglass. The bees are very sensitive to vibration. Remember I said that? And I'll show you the queen. If you all want to get in the line and take your turn, we'll all get to see the queen. All right? Yep.
Responsibility is hard work. Signature health care. Houston County Drug and Emergency Protection Department. We'll see y'all there on the road. We're WCB and Channel 12. Responsible Base Hardware, they're at Tennessee Ridge. All your building needs, gardening needs, you just go on up there and try them out. Houston County Drug Alliance, always trying to keep your children off of drugs with ball games, etc. Traditions First Bank, Houston County's only hometown bank. And Signature Healthcare, Arlington Community here in Tennessee. They can be reached at 289-4141 for information on any thing that you may need. We're WCBN Channel 12.
We got a pretty nice meeting planned tonight. It may take a little bit of time, but we'll get through it. For those who don't know me, my name is Jerry Ivey. I'm the president of the Houston County Historic Society. And this month we have Sturt County joining us. And if you would like, you can introduce yourself to us. If you'd like to, one at a time. Sturt County.
All right, I'm Lawrence Saunders. This is my wife, Nelda.
I'm Carol Sexton.
And Bob Faulkner, and it's my wife, Marlis.
George Hayford, I'm a town manager at Dover.
Ron Collison, my wife, Bethany.
We're sure glad to have you join us this year. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was skiing with opposite.
Have we got everybody now?
No.
Okay. Like I say, I'm sure glad y'all joined us this year, and it looks like the food committee did really good on bringing a lot of food for us, so we shouldn't leave hungry. If you would, Ms. Nina, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Nina. Minutes. Did everybody receive their minutes in the mail or through the email? Anybody didn't receive them, would you raise your hand, or would you contact Vanetta James? Is there any issues with the minutes, or is it? No.
Gary, I make a motion, we accept the minutes.
Thank you, Hon. I'm going to write me a little note where I'll follow my procedures there. You're lucky I even remembered about them, Vanessa. Financial report. Ms. Betty, would you give us a financial report, please?
The last report I gave was in April a year now. And our checking account balance was $4,972.73. Income was dues of $240, books of $90, shirts $12. Our the Houston County government $500, and our interest $121, making our total income for those months is $843.21. Our expenses for shirts was $102.93, $357 for liability insurance, $450 to George Osbrooks for repairing the Magnolia sign, and $100 for the academic banquet that we contribute each year to the high school. Then the balance of $4,806.01. Our memorial account has $2,668.69. Our certificate of deposit is $10,515.09.
Thank you, Ms. Betty. We take that motion and pass it as is.
So moved.
All right, anybody second it? All right, thank you. We got any old business that we need to discuss?
I think Bob wants to report on the sign.
Okay.
You want an explanation of $450? Well, Mr. George went down, he picked up the sign, and I didn't realize it, but it was damaged to a certain degree. Well, he took the sign, he mounted it on a metal frame where it was on a wooden frame, and a steel post. And it's a beautiful sign. It's like it was when it was new. And in fact, it had been there since 12 years. But it did have some damage that I didn't realize, but he repaired the damage, and it's just like it was when it was new. So I think that was money well spent, and it should be there, and it's very attractive.
Sounds good to me. We don't need to make a motion on that because I think we already did. Didn't we already approve it? Okay. The Briggs? Nothing. Okay. We're still waiting on that, and we'll get in touch with City Hall about our memorial walk with our Briggs on it, so maybe we can report that next meeting. We were supposed to have part of a business meeting this month, and I think we're going to decide to postpone it until next month. Thank you. I wasn't sure. Okay, thank you. So we got T-shirts, and I'm not trying to shove these down, but we still got them for sale. It's got the Houston County Historic Society on the front of it. It's got the old courthouse. I have a number of different designs and everything, so if anybody wants any, just talk to me after the meeting. I spent a little bit of the Historic Society's money, but without permission, but I think it'll be okay. Somebody emailed me a notice that this was on eBay. And what this is the Colbert Club shoebox that they used to ship the shoes in, I believe, when somebody purchased them, probably from a catalog or something like that. And this one come from Parsons, Tennessee, and it was on eBay, and I gave $16 for it. And I think it was a really good deal because it's got here in Tennessee on the bottom of it. And I believe it was probably made late 50s or early 60s, Miss Betty. You think I'm right there?
It was made right here.
I know, but I'm in that
We're
time
sitting
frame.
where the Culver Cubs shoe factory was.
Yes, it was located identically where we are right now. So, and thanks to Melissa for putting us onto it and letting us know that it was on there. And so we purchased it. I think it was a good buy.
I move move we reimburse Jerry $16.
I'd like to make a motion that we put it in the archive, because that way everybody can see it, and that's one of the main reasons I bought it, so. Do we need to make a motion on that, or just go with it? Okay.
I'll include that in my motion,
Okay.
reimburse you and then donate it to the archive.
Can I second it? Because I think that's a good idea.
I can second it.
All right. So pass as is. Everybody say aye? Anybody opposed to it? All right. Donate it to the archives. Do I need to make a motion on that?
I did.
Oh, she did. Well, let's do it. I'm not a speaker.
One more time for that, please.
And I also received this is a blowed up postcard from the gentleman that's going to do the program in September. And this is the football team from the Cumberland City Academy. Life is Worth Living, Cumberland City, Tennessee. So he has different area postcards, and I saw this one and he said, I'll blow it up and send you a picture of it. And I'll pass it around, and I'd like to put it in the archives too. Halfway through. Good. All right, Melissa wanted to say a few words, so I'll give you the floor then.
I'd like to welcome all of Stewart County here tonight. We're so glad to have you. I have a few things to talk about tonight and a surprise. First thing I want to talk about is this coming Saturday, we are having what we are calling the Gathering. The Friends of the Brunson Hollister Homestead Project is going to have an event on Saturday from 10 until 2 p.m. And we are going to meet at Lockhart's Chapel on 149. And there we're going to have, hopefully we're going to have a scanner and a videographer there. And so if you have pictures or stories about the home, or if you know anybody that's lived in the home, we'd like for them to come and give us their stories and pictures. As of late this afternoon, we believe we're going to be able to have access to the house. It's kind of gone back and forth, but late afternoon, we still think we're going to have access to the house. So we are hoping to be able to take groups of people to the house to see the house. So I've got these flyers I'm going to let you all pass around, and these little cards too. As some of you may or may not know, TVA bought the property about a year ago, and thanks to Nelda Saunders and to Nina Finley. Where's Nina? There she is. I believe we were able to talk them into not tearing it down, which would have been of great loss. And so the Friends of the Brunson Hollister Homestead, we are a committee of people. I'm on there. Ski is on there. Miss Betsy is on there, and Bob over here is on there. We are in the beginnings of trying to hopefully, we're in talks with TVA to see about what to do with the house. So we're kind of really at the very beginning of this. But right now we're just wanting people to be aware that it's there, and we want you to come out this Saturday and come and see it. And if you have any pictures, information, or stories about the house, please come with those and share those with us, because we'd like to know about those. Is there anything else, Ski, that I'm missing? Yeah, we're really trying to gather up as much of the history of the house as we can. And the iron furnaces, because the Brunson iron furnace is there on the property. There's a cemetery there on the property as well. On Saturday, we plan on having several people in costume, Civil War era costume. Mr. Fields, who portrays Grant, is supposed to be there Saturday. Mr. Kim Schmidt, who's with Stewart County Historical Society, is going to be there to talk about the cemetery. And we're going to have other speakers, Dusty Holder and Susan Bell. Their Hollister family is from that house, so they're going to be there to talk. John just said John Grant. Mr. Fields, who's not. We tried to get Nathan Bedford Forrest to come, but he has something else to do that day. Yes. So please come out. The 4-H group is going to have hamburgers and hot dogs, I think. They're going to have food for purchase. So if anything, just come out and support them. So I think we're hoping to really have a good turnout and hopefully do a really good thing by saving this house and hopefully doing something really good with it. I usually give a short update on our archives. Nothing really has changed since last month. We're kind of at a standstill. We have archived the Circuit Court criminal and civil loose records up to 1969. And to Stewart County, they're probably thinking, wow, 1969. We have lost records, so we're able to get that far pretty quick. We are waiting for the budget meetings to start because we have the amount for our renovations to the old jail. The county gave us the basement of the old jail for more record storage. That keeps going down. And so, I don't know. And so we have submitted a budget which include buying the shelving and also replacing the 2 wooden doors. There's 2 wooden doors that go from the outside to the basement, and they're in pretty poor shape and not really that secure. So we're also asking for them to be replaced with steel doors. And that will go before the budget, and when that gets passed, we'll be able to get moving on that. The next thing, does anyone here know Audrey Von Baggett? She lives in Cumberland City. She had posted something on Facebook. It's amazing what Facebook does for history. But that she had a Bible that she was wanting to donate. And watch out, Jared, the top's off. Okay. And it's actually the W.J. Brodus family Bible. And I met with her this past Saturday, and she donated it to the archives. The Bible is dated of 1873, but whoever wrote in it has dates for marriage and death and births dating back to 1850. And so it belonged to the W.J. Brodus family. Remember that name because it's going to come into play with my surprise in a minute. The next book that she donated is a German medical book. It's in German, so I cannot read it. The publishing date on that is 1863. It belongs to the Bayer family. And I believe the Bayer family is a Stewart County name. Yes. John George Bayer. And that book belonged to his family. And so she donated both of those books to the archives, and the Stewart Houston Times is going to have hopefully a story this next week in the newspaper. So we want to thank her very, very much for that. And the last thing is the surprise. Is the president of the Stewart County Historical Society here? Well, Miss Nelda, you come up here.
All right, we've got our vice president.
Okay, who's your vice president?
Carol Sexton.
Okay, Miss Sexton, can you come up here? A few months back, there was a gentleman that used to live here in Houston County. He moved to Louisiana. His wife had passed away. He remarried, then moved to Louisiana. He contacted Kay French, our librarian, because when he lived here, he collected artifacts and items belonging to this area. He had decided that he no longer wants these items, so he is starting to send them back our way. This item that he sent to us doesn't necessarily belong in Houston County. So we've decided that it needs to go back to where it belongs. It's wrapped up.
Oh, good. Those ones on the hard pharmacies.
I contacted your Mr. Jim Long with the archives, and I asked him if this brick belonged to you all because I was told that it did. And he sent me back some information. And so I sent back some information that I'm going to read just real quick and then I'm done. In 1854, Hamilton Settle purchased Lot 83 in Dover, which is at the corner of Main Street and Church Street today, roughly next door to Anglin Funeral Home. In the 1860 census, Hamilton Settle was living in Dover and his occupation was stonecutter. In 1865, Hamilton Settle executed a mortgage to Thomas J. Settle to secure his debts consisting of 30 to 50,000 bricks, plus livestock. On June 13, 1868, Hamilton Settle executed a trust deed to W.J. Brodus. That's where W.J. Brodus comes in again to this story. In order to secure a debt to C.P. Moore consisting of various property, including his brickyard in Dover. In the 1870 census, Hamilton Settle was living in Dover and his occupation was stonemason. Hamilton Settle died just prior to August 1873. In the 1880 census, I don't see any Settles who are apparently continuing the brick-making business. I do not have the information on when Lot 83 in Dover left the Settle family. And Jim says that he would say that Hamilton Settle is your brick maker and that the brick probably dates to the 1850s to the 1860s. This brick was actually, we were told that it actually came out of a building from downtown Clarksville. That had either been torn down or came down when they had the tornado. And so I am a firm believer in artifacts that belong in other places need to go back to those places where they can have their home where they belong. So that's for you tonight.
Thank you, Melissa. Does anybody else have anything they want to report before we start our program? I guess not. So on with the show we go. Tonight's program is presented by William C. Cal James. His career after earning a PhD at the Indiana University spanned more than 3 decades and included teaching, research, and the practical application of geology to answer questions about Earth history. Born in Humphreys County, Tennessee, he spent part of his boyhood years listening to stories about the Civil War and ancestors' possible roles in the war. His advocate for the past 20 years has been Civil War history, and he resulted in a 2011 work of the non-fictional skimmage of the Irish Shanty. He lives with his daughter in Columbus, Ohio, and we're glad to have him here in Tennessee tonight. Thank you.
Nothing quite as embarrassing as knocking over the American flag, so I'm going to move it out of the way. Can you hear me okay? Any problems hearing me? I'm going to unleash this thing from its holder because I like to move around, and if it gets to be a problem, just put up your hand, let me know, and I'll fix the problem. I was here 10 years ago. Some of you may remember me. Most of you, I suspect, do not. But I gave a talk about something similar to this evening, but this evening's talk is very different in many ways because I've expanded it quite a bit. And one of the things that struck me when I was here 10 years ago was the hospitality. And it's still here. Some things don't change. So I want to thank all of you, Jerry, Vanetta, Alan, and so many more of the rest of you for all that hospitality. It's greatly appreciated. You should have gotten the weather a little cooler, but I'm not going to complain too much about that. Well, the title of this evening's talk has to do with military trials, Civil War military trials in western Middle Tennessee. And if I could have the next slide, please. Military commission trials are trials, in this particular instance, by federal military folks and tribunals of civilians. Most of those civilians were, of course, sympathetic to the South, perhaps not all. But that's the kind of trial I'm talking about. So I'll just refer to it as a military trial, and you'll understand we're talking about civilian trials, not courts-martial trials, where it would be a trial by, in this case, the federal government of a Union trooper or federal trooper. And then, as part of this discussion, I'll talk about a particular incident that took place down in western Dixon County, southern Dixon County and western Dixon County, near the present town of Tennessee City, which didn't exist in the 1863. But it took place on July 2nd of 1863, almost exactly 150 years ago. I want to talk to you about what happened, who was involved, and how two trials that spin off of this fit in with this bigger picture of the military commission trials in this part of the state. If I can have the next slide. Now I want to back up for just a moment and show you a modern map. And I don't know if all of you can read this or not, but this is 49. It's a little store right here, and it's 46 coming up from Dixon. There's Cedar Creek Road, if you're familiar with that, not too far from here. And here's Bear Creek, where Bear Creek runs into Yellow Creek. In 1863, there was a store there called Sheldon's Store. And one of the people involved in the trials that I'm going to talk to you about tonight was J.W. Shelton, and he was co-owner of that store in 1863. I want to give you a feel for the kinds of things that were going on in this area, because I know it's hard to realize just how active an area this was throughout much of the Civil War, especially in 1860, late 1862, 63, 64, into 1865. And to get along in this area, I just wanted to take about 3 weeks, from May 22nd to June 8th, 1863, and talk about two people. One is a Colonel William Lyon of the 13th Wisconsin at Fort Donaldson. He would take over from Colonel Lowe starting in early June and would run things for a few months while Colonel Lowe was away. And speak about particularly the 5th Iowa Cavalry and some rebel guerrillas. But before I go to this particular example on Yellow Creek, let me read from you. I'm going to paraphrase. I don't want to take and read to you. It can get a little stale that way. A paraphrase from a book that Colonel Lowe and Colonel Lyon and Adelia Lyon, his wife, wrote about 25 years after the Civil War, and is based on his diary that he kept throughout the Civil War. And one of the dates that I'm going to start out with is I'm going to start out with slightly before May 22nd, May 8th. And on May 8th, he talks about, well, we think we captured one of the Hintons today, brought him in. And Hinson, I have a good friend named Hinton, but I'll say that more than once. If you're familiar, and I think everybody is probably here, in Tom McKinney's book, Jack Hinson's One-Man War, you know who he's talking about. And a little bit later on, he says, we're holding, he says, George Hinson, and we're trying him as a spy. Well, if you've read this book, you know that George Hinson was dead by this time, but his brother Robert was likely the one. He also says, Colonel Lyon, that old Hinson, Jack Hinson, is rumored in the area with guerrillas. And he goes on a little bit later. Woodward is thought to be on Yellow Creek with 1,500 men and artillery. The telegraph line has been cut again between Fort Donaldson and Clarksville. Lots of things going on. And this is just one of them. On May 22nd, a guy named, who's going to hear his name again, Aaron James, medical doctor, says he was on his way up to Sheldon's Store. He was going up there. He lived in southern Dixon County near Piney River. He's on his way to Sheldon's Store to buy some corn. He's headed up there, and he says, just a little bit south of Sheldon's Store on the Yellow Creek Road, I ran into some southern guerrillas. He said, I tried to talk them out of getting in trouble, And then he says, well, I didn't have anything better to do, so I just followed along with them on up to Sheldon's store. And then, out of nowhere, the 5th Iowa Cavalry attacks. And there's a skirmish. And among others, Aaron James gets captured. And they take him over to Fort Donaldson, and they throw him in the stockade. That's his story. He would remain in the stockade for about 2.5 or 3 weeks. And then on June the 6th, and this I do want to read to you because I'll get it wrong otherwise. Colonel Lyon states in his diary, on June 6th, I have been beset today by women whose husbands are in the guardhouse, citizens all. One complained she had 8 small children and nothing to eat. I promised to investigate the case soon. Now, I don't know if Aaron James' wife, Elizabeth Holt James, was one of those women who was complaining about her husband being in the guardhouse. But I do know that he signed an oath of allegiance on the 8th of June and was released. So, 150 years ago, on June 11th, 1863, Aaron James, after this episode, which was his second run-in with the Union soldiers, he was at home in the Piney area of southern Dixon County. Lots of things going on in this area. Lots of activity. You can have the next slide, please. All right, now let's go away from the close-by stuff just for a minute and talk about these military commission trials. According to Record Group 153 from National Archives, there were over 5,500 such trials. That's an estimate. I suspect there were quite a few more than that. We just don't have the records of all of them. So over 5,500. Notice that Tennessee makes up almost 1,000 of that 5,500. So there was a lot of activity in the state. Only one state surpasses it, Missouri. Next slide. And if we look at the western part of Middle Tennessee, here's the Tennessee River to form the western boundary. I'm going to use Nashville. Well, actually, I'm going to cheat and use Murfreesboro over here as the boundary going the other direction. In this general area, Clarksville there, Dover, down here is Pulaski, and so on. You see that there were about 400 trials in this part of Middle Tennessee. Most were at Nashville, almost 200. Quite a few at Pulaski, but that's very late in the war, late 1864 and 1865. And then the third on the list is Clarksville. There were over 50 trials, about 50 trials, 49 to be exact, that took place, at least that many, that took place in Clarksville. And that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit about this evening. In fact, I have a handout that has each one of the people tried at those trials, a summary of what happened to each of them, and you can pick one up over on the far table to your right, as long as they last. If they don't last, electronic copy is always available if you get in contact with me. All right, so we want to concentrate here on Clarksville. Not a lot of trial information from Fort Donaldson, but I know it was active, very active. But only, according to the archives data, about 16 or 18 civilians were tried. Now, I suspect it was more than that. Next slide. So here are the number of trials at Clarksville. They took place in 4 military commissions primarily, March 1863 through May 1865. The number of courts-martial, that would be federal troops trying, federal military courts trying federal troops, almost double the number of civilian trials. But we're going to concentrate just on the civilian trials. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, go back one. Now, I'm sorry. Looked just like the other one, didn't it? All right. Sorry about that. Of those 49 trials, there were 56 people tried. And 33 of them were tried as either guerrillas, spies, or a violation of the oath of allegiance. Some others I call more civilian crimes, although they may have indirectly been also related to to things like being a guerrilla and the like. But these were things like stealing a horse, robbery, murder, in some cases, that kind of thing. Now, next slide. Sorry about that. I'm going to speak now about the Second Military Commission. This is one that started in July of 1863 by Special Order number 174 from General Rosecrans, commanding the Army of the Cumberland in Nashville with the Union. Next slide. And this is a timeline of the trials that took place during this Second Military Commission. This is July, August, September, and so on through December. The Second Commission actually ran into February, but there wasn't much, February of 1864, but there wasn't much activity during that time. And there were 13 trials and 19 defendants. Most people were tried by themselves, but there were a few doubles, like Scales and Youngers were tried together. The Cheney boys were both tried for murdering their uncle. And the biggest trial was Few and 4 others, was tried right after Aaron James, for an event that took place July 2nd, 1963, down at what's now the Tennessee City area. And those are the 2 trials I want to focus on because they represent, in terms of people tried, they represent 5 of the 19 defendants. Next slide. The trials took place, all of these in Clarksville. And this is a map from the 1860s. It's a combination of Merrill's 1865 map and Williams' directory superimposed on it. Cumberland River, north arrow going off like that. Stewart's College, later Austin Peay. And if you've been recently to the Public Square area, you know that there's a nice hotel over here, the Riverview Inn, for reference. But in 1863, the jail was right here next to the Public Square. There was a bank building called the Davies Bank Building, which was the Bank of America. And in that bank building, in that vault, was held the roster of a small prison that was present in Clarksville. It ranged usually from about 20 to 40 inmates at any one time, and that's, I think, where they put several of the folks who were captured. They may have actually been in the jail area, and the information kept in the Davies Bank Building. They may also have been spread out around some of the tobacco warehouses down next to the river. In addition, there's the old courthouse up here and a law office of Henry and Shackelford. And I mentioned Shackelford's name because I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in just a minute. All right, next slide. The details of the commission. For military commissions trying civilians throughout this area, but we're going to concentrate on Clarksville, there were usually 3 voting members. There was a president, Lieutenant Colonel, in this case, John Galt, and a Lieutenant Colonel George Bowman, another voting member. And then there was a 3rd voting member, which was either Captain John Belden for the first 3 or 4 trials, and then was taken over by Captain George Conaway when Belden's 8th Kentucky Cavalry moved out and was reassigned. And then there was the judge advocate, or the prosecutor, Captain John W. Tidings. So that's the bunch that served on the military commission at the time of these trials. Next slide. During the 4 military commissions, not just the second one, there were a number of trials, and James Shackelford was the principal attorney for most. You can see the names of some of the others I've listed as unknown here. Probably they're distributed among this group of attorneys. Simply the person taking down the notes failed to put the information in the transcripts. There's a picture of James Shackelford. I spent a lot of time in Dover. Then he moved to Clarksville. Later on in his career, he ends up on the Tennessee Supreme Court after the war. He went to Lexington, to the University of Transylvania, which is also the place that Colonel Bruce went to college. And also, Colonel Bruce was closely associated with another person I'm going to mention here in a few minutes, John Hunt Morgan. They were brothers-in-law. So, next slide. All right, so now here we are, early July 1863. What's going on in addition to the Irish Shanty skirmish? You've got Gettysburg here, 50,000 casualties, 6,000 killed outright, Meade's army, major defeat for the South. You've got Vicksburg, after a long siege, surrenders on July the 4th. And you've got John Hunt Morgan on July 2nd making his way into Kentucky, and he'll end up in Indiana and Ohio being captured late in July. So lots of things going on, not just locally with the guerrilla activity here, but on a much bigger scale as well. Next slide. All right, this is an 1867 map showing the area of Nashville over here, Clarksville, there's Dover, Fort Donelson. Here's the Cumberland River, Yellow Creek, running to the north, Tennessee River over here, and in green, there's a railroad, the Nashville and Northwest Railroad. The Nashville and Northwest Railroad will be finished all the way to Johnsonville in May of 1864. But as of July 2nd, 1863, at the time of the Irish Shanty skirmish here in western Dixon County, it was finished only as far as Kingston Springs. But in the area of the Irish Shanty, the berm had been set up, it had been surveyed, and no tracks had been laid, but there were mile markers. And they were constructing trestles over here west of the current Dixon-Humphreys County line between there and what would later become known as McEwen, right after the war. So lots of activity in this area, lots of guerrilla activity in this area, as I'll tell you in just a minute, quite a bit of turmoil. A couple of other things to note, Palmyra, you all know about Palmyra and the burning of Palmyra. Harpeth Shoals is another area of intense guerrilla activity throughout much of the war, as many of you know. All right, Colonel Bruce. Colonel Bruce was informed on July the 1st that there was guerrilla activity by a citizen or by citizens. There was guerrilla activity down at the Irish settlement in Dixon County and at the Adams House along Yellow Creek. So immediately, Colonel Bruce dispatches 2 scouts, company size, 65 to 70 men. One is headed by a Captain Hunter, who leaves Clarksville and goes by land all the way down through Charlotte and probably goes to the Adams House. That's we don't hear any more about him. The other is Captain Deaver with another 65 or 70 men, and both these scouts, by the way, are for the 8th Kentucky Cavalry. Yes, 8th Kentucky Cavalry. Takes and floats down the river to Cumberland City, and in the late afternoon, early evening of July 1, leaves and goes up the Yellow Creek Road, probably to Andrew Brown's, a mill where they spend the night. We think they spend the night going to the Irish Shanty, because that's where they spend the night on July the 2nd. At that point in time, he dispatches several men to go over to the Bethany area near where Vanetta lives now, and arrest a gentleman named John James. John James is the brother of the Aaron James that I mentioned before. He's brought back to identify Aaron James, who they suspect is going to be in the middle of all this the next day. So the next day they get up and they continue south on July the 2nd, and Captain Deaver places 12 men under Lieutenant Curry in front, about a quarter of a mile, to lead the group down. And about halfway down, or somewhere in here, he encounters another civilian, and he finds out that not only is there a lot of activity in general down at the Irish settlement, but specifically their activity is at the Irish Shanty. The Irish Shanty is sort of a grog shop and dry goods store and grocery store. It's a little bit of everything you can buy You can buy dresses there and shoes, and you can buy whiskey, of course. You can buy all those different things. It's owned by Augustus and Catherine Seaborn, and they are the proprietors as well. So they're headed down to the Irish Shanty. Next slide. They get there about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And this is a picture taken and put together from a lot of different people testifying. So you get a really good picture of what was there. North is to your right. Here's the railroad. You see a railroad today running right along 70 between Dixon and Tennessee City and McEwen. It's more or less the same railroad. The position has changed a little bit in some places. But remember, the rails have not been laid as of July 2nd, but there was a berm along here, and there were mileposts along here. Lieutenant Curry leads the 8th Kentucky, those 12 men in front, up into some woods that's east of the shanty. Shanty's a low building, and Lieutenant Curry leaves his people back here, his soldiers. He sends one around to a priest's house. He sends Corporal Hughes around there to find out if he knows anything about guerrilla activity in the area. And Lieutenant Curry moves forward to the edge of the woods, and he sees in the front several men sitting around. They look like they're cleaning their weapons and getting ready for some kind of mischief. He sees 20 to 30 men and horses in the woods here as well. He decides that there are so many people here, he's going to signal in a minute and have Captain Deaver come up 200 or 300 yards behind at this point and join him before they attack. Now in that yard, I've listed some names. There's a guy named Terry McGuire, and Terry McGuire's a local. My mom and dad owned a grocery store, and we had people who would come in just after the grocery store opened. They were called sitters, and they'd stay there all day. Well, he was a local, and he was there, and he got there right after things opened up, and I'm sure he was just hanging around and talking to anybody that would come. The proprietor, Catherine Seaborn, was out front. She was out front when Curry's looking that direction. And you've got a couple of folks. There's a Jonas Spicer. Jonas Spicer is a very successful businessman over in Humphreys County. And he's there to buy some shoes, he says, and some other things for a friend of his. He's a widower. He has 5 young kids, and he is courting at this point. William Few and John Box and a medical doctor, Peyton Washburn, they're there to drive a cow home that Few purchased a couple of days prior. And then about 11:30, Euphrates Shelton, a young man in his early 20s, James Shelton, the owner of the store that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and Aaron James show up. And they've been trading horses the night before, and for whatever reason, James is going the opposite direction of his home from this horse trading, and he says he just wanted to join his friends over at the Irish Shanty. So they're all out in the front, and William Few says to Catherine Seaborn, we would like some boiled eggs, and we would like for you to boil up 10 dozen eggs, 10 dozen, 120 eggs. So she's got a fire going in a big pot out front with 10 dozen eggs cooking. Lieutenant Curry, at this point, has received information from his corporal, Corporal Hughes, who's back from seeing the priest, and he says there's good evidence, there's lots of horse activity between here and where I was, and that there are a lot of people around here, and that confirms what Lieutenant Curry saw, the 20 to 30 men here, plus another several out in here. So at this point, Lieutenant Curry is going to cause Captain Deaver to move folks up and join him. But as he's doing that, Spicer notices that there are soldiers and yells, there's a lot of soldiers out there, and immediately John Box takes off running through the field, and Jonas Spicer runs, jumps on his mule, and takes off up this road to get away. But Lieutenant Curry orders him to stop 3 times, There's a lot of milling around here and confusion. And when they don't, he orders his men to fire and then mount, and they all charge. At this point, there's return of fire. The estimate is 20 to 30 shots from the shanty and the men in the woods. Things go pretty quickly. Box gets away, although Captain Deaver thinks he was wounded. We know he got away because he signs a petition about 2 months later. And three soldiers take off after Jonas Spicer or his mule. And one of them is James Meese. James Meese will turn 15 on the 4th of July. He's 14 at the time. He's chasing down this 33-year-old man who's shooting at him. But they catch Spicer and they bring him back to the house. They get everybody out of the house, and there's lots of confusing and cursing and yelling and we'll kill you. And unfortunately for Mr. Few, he says, we were expecting Captain Hunter from a different direction. Okay. We were expecting Captain Hunter to come in with his scout from a different direction. So the whole thing's over in about 45 minutes. And what happens is that Captain Seaborn and Terry McGuire tell Captain Deaver, there are a lot of guerrillas around here. You need to get out of here. And so they leave. And we know there was a lot of guerrilla activity around there because later that afternoon, there's a big skirmish about 3 or 4 miles away on Hurricane Creek, near the railroad, one of the railroad trestles that's just starting to be built. So we know that there were lots of guerrillas in the area. Could have been those 20 or 30. They find several weapons, some of them 6-shooters with 3 chambers having been spent. So they have pretty good evidence that there was firing. Now, let's go to the next slide. They immediately retrace their steps up to Andrew Brown's and spend the night on the 2nd. They send John James back to his home in the Bethany area, and they can make their way up to Clarksville on July 3rd and stick them all in the stockade. Next slide. Here are the defendants. From Dixon County, Aaron James, James Shelton, Euphrates Shelton. From Humphreys County, William Few, Jonas Spicer, and Dr. Peyton Washburn. Those 6 people. And they're going to be tried in 2 trials, one separately for James and the other 5 lumped together. Next slide. There were 3 charges. James was charged with all 3 counts, or charges, being the captain of the guerrilla band, shooting at U.S. soldiers, and violating his, they didn't know at the time, his 2nd oath of allegiance. The other 5 were charged with these 2 charges, shooting at U.S. soldiers and violating their oaths. Very, very tough charges because you could be put to death for those things. Next slide. Here's from the testimony of William Few in the Aaron James trial. I know you can't read all this. It's just an example. The judge advocate, Tidings, did you not hear James curse and swear when he first came out of the house? Few, I don't recollect. I was right smartly agitated. Judge advocate, did you not hear James tell Lieutenant Curry he would kill him yet? Few, no sir. Judge advocate, what was the object of you meeting there that morning? Do you know what brought James there? Well, I came to drive a cow home. I don't know why James was there. Judge advocate, what was your pistol loaded with? With bullets. Is it the practice of the physicians in your neighborhood to assist people in driving their cows home? And the Few said, well, I reckon not, but Dr. Washburn went with me to drive mine. Now, probably you shouldn't have, said all those things in that way. And I suspect they weren't quite as smart aleckly as I read them. Most of the testimony was not that interesting, but a lot of it was. And there were over 250 handwritten pages of testimony in these 2 trials that I stumbled upon. And I said, this is too good to leave in National Archives. So I made a copy. I didn't take the original, obviously. And I put a book together based on it. Next slide. All right, defense, Shackelford versus the prosecution, Tidings. The defense was, these guys were all liquored up. It was a mitigating factor. Now, Shackelford uses that in several of his trials. Because these guys are on trial for their life, and if he can get mitigating circumstances where they don't hang these guys, he's going to feel pretty good. And based on the testimony of at least two the officers involved and one enlisted man, well, they may have been drinking, but they were faking some of this. The defense said there were no men in the woods. They just imagined those 20 or 30 men in the woods. And the prosecution said we counted an estimated 20 to 30 in horses. The defense said the soldiers were just excited, they overreacted, and of course the soldiers who testified said it was just another skirmish. Then there was all the smoke. Well, it was either from the fire from cooking those eggs, 10 dozen eggs, or the smoke was from weapons fire. Next slide. The finding of the military commission. James was found guilty, except they threw in the Palmyra charge because he was they thought he was one of the ones at Palmyra as well. He probably was, it turns out. Found guilty, and they sentenced him to be hanged at the pleasure of the president. Next slide. The young guy, Euphrates Shelton, in his 20s, was found guilty of his 2 charges and sentenced to prison for 5 years hard labor. And Jonas Spicer, who presumably shot at James Meese and others as he was riding away on his not too speedy mule, was found guilty and sentenced to be hanged as well. Now here's the interesting thing. Next slide. Not guilty for the other 3. Very interesting. And this it's interesting because this is the last and only time during the 4 military commissions that they try more than 2 people together. And by finding these 3 people not guilty, William Few, Peyton Washburn, and James W. Shelton, it casts some doubt on the guilty verdicts, as we'll see later. Next slide, please. So, this particular military prison list, roll of prisoners, shows Aaron James, Euphrates Shelton, and Spicer all listed for November of 1863 at the Clarksville prison. And they would start showing up on the list starting in August and would continue into December of 1863. Next slide. Another timeline. This shows the Irish Shanty skirmish on July the 2nd, the James trial 16 to 21 in July, Few trial 24 to 30 in July. And then in August, on the 14th, General Rosecrans, commanding, approves the James sentence and sends it on to Judge Advocate General Holt in Washington and President Lincoln. The next day, he issues General Order 199, and what that says, and I'm paraphrasing, is, citizens of Middle Tennessee, if you leave us alone and mind your own business, and don't act like guerrillas, we'll leave you alone. But if you start bothering us and give us trouble, we'll try you and we may hang you. Okay? Immediately after that, there are citizen petitions that start to be signed. Over 300 names in this area were assigned to the petitions, including John Box, regarding Spicer. And there were several letters of affidavit written on behalf of all 3 of the people convicted, and those are in my book as well. All of this information is there, including the petitions. And that's where we find ourselves as we go to the next slide. There's General Thomas, who's going to take over a little later for the Army of the Cumberland in October after what happened down in Georgia. Holt and Lincoln decisions. Judge Advocate General Holt, and there's Holt in the center, writes an 8-page opinion. I gave you the last sentence. It is recommended, therefore, that the sentence of the court be disapproved. So he was reversing General Rosecrans and the trial court about James's sentence to be hanged. It goes to President Lincoln. Now Lincoln, in this time in 1863, in November, has just finished the Gettysburg Address, comes home there about 3 days in Washington, falls sick with probably a light case of smallpox, and is just recovering. And one of the few things he does, as of December 12th, he goes back to work full time just a couple of days after that, is He has met with the Judge Advocate General because they always met on these things involving life and death, and he writes sentence disapproved following the Judge Advocate, the famous A. Lincoln signature, and that frees James. And General Thomas, at about the same time, also frees Euphrates Shelton and Spicer as well. Next slide. So, Shelton, Spicer, James. Shelton goes on, he gets in trouble now and then between 1863 and the end of the war, but he doesn't get tried before any more military commissions. But he goes on and he returns eventually after the war to Montgomery County, where his family lived, becomes the surveyor, state surveyor, not the state, the county surveyor of that county, and lives to 1907. Has a bunch of children, and one of them is Ron Smithfield. Some of you may know up in Clarksville, he's a businessman there. R. Jonas Spicer, with his 5 little kids, marries the woman he went to get the shoes for, and lives another 4 years or 5 years at the most, where he is either killed or dies of natural causes. For all I know, he was kicked in the head by a horse. I don't know, but he is dead before 1869. He was about 38 to 40 years old at the time. Aaron James goes back, has his property on Piney removed from his care by the federal government for all their trouble. He moves to a place where I grew up, Poplar Grove in Humphreys County, where there is absolutely nothing going on, so he was safe. Where he was on Piney, his Woodward would take his men right up by the guy's farm, right up by Aaron James's farm, and because Aaron James was a medical doctor, he would often get Aaron James to care for his sick soldiers. And he stopped there at least a couple of times and camped on Aaron James's land. But Aaron James, in 1864, gets another little interesting tidbit from the federal government, saying he owes $20,000. It's hard to read. It's either $20,000 or $70,000. I've always chosen $20,000 because that's bad enough in 1863. I can't believe it was 70. He never pays it off, to my knowledge. He goes on. He remains a medical doctor. He was actually trained that way at a medical school. A member of the first graduating class of the University of Louisville Medical School in 1845, 46, 47. And he would remain a medical doctor and die in the area in 1904. And he's one of my great-great-grandfathers. Now, I want to wrap up. I got about 5 more minutes. Next slide. I want to go back to the more general now. Of those 56 people tried in the 4 main military commissions, 37 were found guilty at the trial level, 19 not guilty. Now let's look at the appeals process in the next slide. There are those 19 that were found not guilty. Another 8 had their sentences disapproved, like Aaron James did, and Euphrates Shelton and Spicer, and another 12 had their sentences reduced. So in the end, it broke down about 50-50. About 50 ended up being convicted of something and sticking, and about half not. Of those that served prison terms more than a few months, most ended up at the Nashville Penitentiary. Almost all of them. A few of the lesser charges that ended up in prison were kept at Clarksville. All were at Clarksville originally. One was sent to Alton, Illinois. His name was Amos Black. He was convicted of murder, and he was an African American from Stewart County, and he was convicted of murder for murdering a slave. He was a free man at the time, and he was given 10 years. 10 years. Now let's go to the next slide, please. Typical crime and typical sentence. He stole a horse or a mule. Typical sentence was around 7 to 10 years. If you rob somebody, gunpoint or not, typical sentence 3 to 5 years. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. If you murdered somebody, and there were 3 tried for that, you got either 10 years, or they wanted to hang you. So typically they would want to hang you. If you were a guerrilla and convicted, life to hanging for a majority of those folks. Here this 5 years is Euphrates Shelton. Now let's look at those that are convicted and sentenced to be hanged. In the next slide. That's all right, just go the other way. That's all right, yeah, you're going backwards. You're still going back. No, there we go. There we go, just keep over there. Thank you. There we go. You know about Aaron James and Jonas Spicer already. Convicted, sentenced to be hanged, reversed. George H. Whitehead. George H. Whitehead was convicted of willful murder of a man named Rawson. He was sentenced to be hanged. General Rosecrans reviewed it. They all decided that Rawson deserved to be killed. He was apparently a problem in the community. And so they determined that Mr. Whitehead had done everybody a great service, and they, in essence, released him. It was reversed. Carol McLeod, up near Stewart County again, in Montgomery County, hid guerrillas, performed guerrilla activity, robbed a lot of people, sentenced to be hanged, and his sentence was reduced to 5 years. Oftentimes it would be reduced to either 5 years or the end of the war. One guy, Richard H. Carney, and his brother, I mentioned before, had killed their uncle. The other brother was found to be not guilty, but good old Richard was found to be guilty. And in 1863, July, to the trial court, both General Rosecrans and later General Thomas approved the sentence. It went to the judge advocate, who approved the sentence. It went to the president, who approved the sentence. It went back down. And in February, Mr. Carney was moved to Nashville, and it went back up on appeal to the judge advocate, and the judge advocate chose not to act. And we don't know for sure if he was hanged or not, but we have no evidence that he was let go, and we have no evidence that he was hanged. So I don't have a good answer for that. Next slide. Almost done now. I do have a book. If you buy the soft cover and you're interested, it's $15. If the hardcover is $25. It has all the trial transcripts, about a 10 or 12 page summary at the beginning of what was going on in this area during the Civil War, biographical sketches of the principals involved, and a calendar from the time that Tennessee went out of the Union to the end of the war with what went on in Middle Tennessee during this time. And the next slide, this is hot off the press. I have nothing to do with this. It's from the Humanities Outreach in Tennessee in their 2013-2014 season for the young people in Davidson County and other counties around, if interested. In their high schools will be a play called The Burden of Justice, 1863, and it's based on the Aaron James trial. And they're going to be talking about it. One actor plays 10 different parts in all of this, and it should be pretty interesting, and it's available to historical societies, but they charge money. I don't know any more about it than that, but I do have the contacts if you're at all interested. And with that, two things. There's a handout that's over to your far right by one of the book that's standing up that has all the trials summarized. The 49 trials from the 4 different military commissions in Clarksville. If you're into genealogy and you know a lot of people in the past, you may find one of them on there. So you're welcome to pick up a copy. If it would run out, just get with me and I'll make sure that I send you an electronic copy of it. I can send something to Vanetta, she can send it, or to Jerry or whoever. With that, thank you for your attention, and I'll open it up for any questions. Yes?
When did McEwen get his name, McEwen?
Well, it shows it on the 67 map. I thought it was a little later than that, the 1867 map. It was a railroad town. It got its name, I understand from an engineer who was involved with the railroad. That's my knowledge.
What was the previous name of it?
I don't think that, I don't know. I think it really developed right around the railroad. That's my understanding. The map, there's a map, it's the 67 map has it on there, yes. So that's where and I know it wasn't before the war. As McEwen, to my knowledge. You sound like you know something that I should know. Okay. And how old do you think it is?
I don't know the age of the I know in the book Rebel Sons of Era,
Uh-huh.
there were people from McEwen recruited and went to help build 4th Unit.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Can you pinpoint Sheldon's stores?
It says it is at the mouth of Bear Creek, south of Bear Creek, near where Bear Creek runs in to Yellow Creek. It's on the east side of Yellow Creek. It's a couple of 100 feet, I think is the description I heard, a couple of 100 feet south.
I'm just curious because I lived over there and there was this something that looked like a store. This old beat up building, but no one knew what it was, where it was, why it was there or anything. And
Okay.
nobody knew.
It's possible. I don't know.
And, you know, I'm just curious if that, it probably wasn't. You know, I'm just curious.
They said, let's see, the source I am thinking about now said it was either dilapidated or torn down in the 1930s. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not. Okay. Yes, other questions?
Do you know that there's a female Shackelford lawyer in Clarksville? I wonder if she's related.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know there was.
I ran across her at one of my craft shows.
Okay.
Bought something from me. The only reason I remember the name is she gave me her card.
Okay.
And she was teaching up there at one of the colleges.
Okay.
Real nice person.
I don't know. He was a very important lawyer at that time period.
We have a James L. James that was a 9-year owner of this Hollister Furnace or the Asthma Furnace. Melissa was talking about. Is that in your family lineage?
I don't think so. There are a lot, you don't think it's true, but there are a lot of different Jameses. The William James High School in Stewart County, no relationship whatsoever to that James line. Yeah. Is that where is William James is not in Stewart County? It's in White. Sorry about that. I've been gone for 30 years. Forgive me.
I didn't hear it. This is the James James.
What relationship do you, Jason?
Thank you, son. All my cousins, I'll give you two answers. All my cousins will tell you we are very closely related, and Dr. Aaron James was a big friend with Jesse and Frank. I don't know if he was or not, but to the best of my knowledge, there's no relationship whatsoever. A fellow in Bethesda, Maryland, who's considered I don't know, he may be dead by now, but a few years ago, his basement was full of stuff. He knew all the Jameses throughout North America, and they tracked them all. And he was convinced there was no relationship whatsoever of either his family or my family to Jesse and Frank James. And I have no reason not to believe that.
That's a shame because Jack Gibson's married to James.
That's right, John James. And one of the things I looked at when I saw that was Aaron James has a brother named John. But that John James is younger than he's a generation closer to us. But I think, I'm not sure, there was a John James brother that was the next generation back that belongs to us. I don't know if it's the same one or not. I have no idea. I looked around for it, though, just to see what I could find. Couldn't find anything. I'd be very interested in talking to you about humor. Any other questions? Well, thank you. And if you would. I'll tell you what.
We appreciate you coming down here and having this program. And don't forget the handout over here. Please take one if you're interested at all.
in what went on during these trials, these 49 or so trials of 56 individuals.
I have somebody was looking for a copy of this book right here. Want another copy of it? The
I was more interested in